Good evening and welcome to tonight's Shir. Today is Thursday of Parshas Bamidbar. And just advance notice, next Thursday, for technical reasons, we won't have the Shir. Right. So our first question, which I touched on last week, I did not have a chance to look into it carefully then. I'd like to share with you my findings so far. So I got a message, shliach somewhere in the States, and they're having two people getting married, well, two couples getting married in the same week, which is exciting for their small community. And they would like to do the community would like to do a Sheva Brachos. Very nice. They'd like to do one event for both. And then, so the question is, what's the protocol when you've got two Chassanim and Kalas at the same event? How do you do the Sheva Brachos, etc.? So we have here on the screen from Shulchan Aruch Evno Ezer. So im yesh shnei Chassanim yachad. Says the Yosef Karo, the Shulchan Aruch, you have two Chassanim, vorchim birchas Chassanim achas dishneim. And he could be talking about actually a chuppah. You have a couple of chuppahs, few chuppahs. You can do one set of brachas for all of them, and there are more ads, even if they're not mamish together. If you had in mind, then yesh oimrim, the second opinion. The ein levorich l'shnei chasanim yachad. You shouldn't do two chuppahs mamish in one. Mishum ayin hora. I'm not sure exactly why it's ayin hora. If it's one person making several simchas, I can understand. But why should there be, if they're not related, why should there be ayin hora? I don't know. Well, it could be, well, a community, etc. Maybe the community has two simchas. Could also be. Says the Ramo, indeed, the custom is two chasnas, two couples, separate chuppahs, separate brachas. But the brachas at the end of the meal, you can make several chasanim in one set of brachas. So literally, we got, for the moment, we've got this joint Sheva Brachas, and now the Ramoy is talking about not necessarily the week of Sheva Brachas, even the Chasana. He says you make a separate chuppah, but you could have a joint meal and one set of brachas. Not much more so during the week. On the margin of the Shulchan Aruch, we have the Pischei Tshuva, who brings us to the Radvaz. Radvaz Reb David ben Zamra was probably contemporary of the Bis Yosef, both a Mekubal and a Poisek. He writes the following: this is just a précis of the words of Radvaz. It's quite a bit long in the Radvaz. When you've got the two Chassanim, and they themselves are concerned, they don't want to share the bracha. They would like to have their own attention. You can do separate brachas. And he goes, don't worry about overdoing brachas. There is an idea of not saying unnecessary brachas. So the Radvaz here is short, and the Radvaz itself is longer. It's okay because it's to make them happy, to make them. So it's okay. It's not a problem of saying extra brachas. Then it comes to how the next piece is tricky. So you got two chasanim, and we want to do two sets of brachas. So how are you going to work this? You take out one of the chasanim, goes out into another room. And then they bench. And then you come back and you bench for this one. Now, this statement is a little bit ambiguous. You could say the following: You take out one of the chasanim and you do birchas hamazon in the other room, and you do sheva brachas in the other room. V'choizir mevorchim lozeh. Then you come back and you do birchas hamazon and sheva brachas for this one. So all in two separate rooms. That's one way. There's another way of reading to do the following. Motzina se'echad levayis acher. You tell one of the chasanim to leave the room, umevorchim, and the people present in the room do birchas hamazon and sheva brachas. And then the chosen who had left the room, v'choizrim, he comes back, v'choizrim umevorchim lozeh. When the chosen comes back, so then we do another set of brachas for the chosen who just returned into the room. And he says indeed he did so, which is something very, I mean, I've never seen it happen, to have the second form of doing two sets of brachas, the same tzibur. Chosen went out, he comes back, and you do another set of brachas for him. Very interesting. Okay. So what we've seen is you could simply have one set of Sheva Brachas for both couples. If you want, you could do something of someone going out and someone coming back in again. So what I did tell that in Gaman, the shliach there, that if they are not fussy about, they're not makpidim, make one Sheva Brachas for everyone and everyone. That's good. That's good. But now, what came to mind is two things. One is by the Rebbe's Farbrengens. There were occasions where there was Sheva Brachas at the Rebbe's Farbrengens, and there were occasions where there were more than one Sheva Brachas. And so, if I'm saying, how do I jump to that? Sometimes you have a chasana. I made a chasana, let's say on a Tuesday, and my brother-in-law made a chasana on Thursday. So I went along with my daughter and son-in-law, and we had around the table, we did a Sheva Brachas around one table for my daughter's Sheva Brachas. It was within her week. Now, I'm not so sure whether that is legitimate, because here the Radvaz has been saying, you want to do another set of brachas, go out of the room. Someone goes out of the room, then comes back. Or you do the Sheva Brachas in the other room, whichever way you learn. But to do in the same room, I'm a little bit concerned that it doesn't. What am I concerned? Now listen to this. I'm not concerned about bracha levatala. I'll tell you why. What would happen? Never mind two chasana, a regular chasana, and it comes 10 o'clock or 10:30, and some chevra, lots of energy, and they're ready to keep on dancing till 12 o'clock. And some people have to get up to work the next day, and they ask the balabos, can we make a zimun around one table? And he said he's a nice guy. He says, yeah, go ahead. So these 10 people go and sit around a table, they bench, and they'll say Sheva Brachas. That's legitimate. In other words, at the same setting, you could have separate groups saying benching and saying Sheva Brachas. It's not commonly done, but it's theoretically it's okay. And in Shulchan Aruch, it mentions about in the olden times when you'd have a chasana, and there wasn't enough space in one house for everyone to sit together. So you had three neighbors, and each one, their main room had 20 guests. So the chasana is in house A, and house B and C, there's another 20 guests in each one. And they're there for the chasana, they're celebrating, and they're farbringing. And it comes there when they finish their meal, so they will make Sheva Brachas, because they're part of the chasana, even though the chasana isn't there. So therefore, if another group sits around the table at a chasana and does Sheva Brachas, it's not a bracha levatala, but the brachas are for the current chassan, not the chassan from 2 days ago. And the separate point is also that when you do a Sheva Brachas during the week, You need to have a Panu Chadoshes, a special guest who has come, who wasn't there at the wedding and is now enhancing your wedding, at a regular chasna, in the case which I just described. The people who came to the second chasna on Thursday evening, they didn't come for my simcha, they came for that simcha. So if I pull them over to the table, oh, be a Sheva, be a Panu Chadoshes, really? Who catered, everything is it's not nothing to do with me. So with my simcha, it's got to do with the current simcha. So it's to say that that's Sheva Brachas around that huddle around the table is counting as a Sheva Brachas for the chasna the chasna from 2 days ago for that couple is a bit how do you say questionable. And on the other hand, there's no chiyuv to the Sheva Brachas every night. That's also if you have a chasna of a relative during the week of Sheva Brachas and therefore you're not having Sheva Brachas, it's nicht gefährlich. All right. Now, then, as I say, then you start thinking about what happened by the Rebbe. They did do two Sheva Brachas in the same shul in 770. So I'm going to share with you what happened in Tovshin Chov Ches. Tovshin Chov Ches. This is the Rebbe. They looks like they rattled off a few Sheva Brachas for a few Chasanim and Kalas right after one after the other. Possibly they wanted to make it easier for the Rebbe, shouldn't be hanging around. I don't know what the cheshbon was, but they did a series of Shevrachs, one of the other. To which the Rebbe comments, and he says, there are things which are none of my business, and I don't mix into them. But so that this kind of some things will be attributed to me that I took responsibility for. Therefore, I want to clarify. When you have several people eating together at one table, at one event, one table, there is a discussion whether they can break up into separate groups without a hefsek. And he says, I'm not going to mix into a din, which is a din erachaim. That's got to do with rabbonim. And there are rabbonim here that they kapaskin, which they see fit to justify what was done or to say that it should do differently. But not to get into the whole discussion, says the Rebbe, he's asking in the future, there should be between one Sheva Brachas and the next Sheva Brachas, there should be a hefsek with Divrei Torah, obviously with the Sichos, etc. So what I'm seeing here is that the Rebbe Dafka wants it to be separate groups, and I want to take it a little bit further, that by the Rebbe's Fabringens, they weren't, and the Rebbe is saying, in reality, it was separate huddles. Someone had a Sheva Bracha, so they got a few people together around to wash. Most of the people didn't wash, so it was a separate huddle. So here the Rebbe is looking at it as, if you are seeing it, Fabrengen, it's all one big Fabrengen. And he says it would be justified to break it up only if it is over with intervals in between. Now, I'm just looking at the Sikha, and it's interesting, because the Rebbe is not saying I have a problem with the Sheva Brachas being broken up. He is saying a problem of the Zimun being broken up, which is very interesting. Now, every child who's learned a bit of Mishnayos knows that once you get 6 people, you're allowed to divide into 2 groups, and then once you've got 10, you're not allowed to divide into two separate groups because you lose the Zimun over with this Hashem's name. But once you've got 20, you can divide. So this is from Simon Kuf Tzadik Gimel. I'm just trying to explain when the Rebbe is concerned about breaking up into separate groups and doing Sheva Brochas. And as I say, he doesn't seem to be concerned about the Sheva Brochas. He's concerned about breaking up to separate mezumans. I mean, pardon my English. So here you have that you are allowed to break up into separate groups if you have Rishus of the Balabayas. Now, this Simon Kuf Tzadik Gimel, unfortunately, most of it is missing in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. That's why you have the Mishnah Berurah over here. And he says, and this is what the Rebbe is referring to, although you are allowed to break up into separate groups, mitzvah min amuvcha sheloi lehischalek. It is actually recommended not to divide into separate groups, whether it's 20 into 2 groups of 10, whether it's 6 into 2 groups of 3, mishum berov om hadras melech. When you've got a greater crowd, it's a greater glory to Hashem, and therefore there is a recommendation not to break up into separate groups. Now, the Rebbe is saying if you're doing it at intervals, and so this perhaps that's more justified because possibly it's more convenient that way. That these are ready to bench now. However, the justification is to break it up because of the intervals. But possibly this is what the Rebbe is concerned about, where he says, Yesh mokel shach klibetaria, whether to break up into separate groups without a hefsek. So there is a concern. What does the hefsek do? That I still am not totally confident. I know the explanation. Okay, let's move on. Let's get to something totally different, and that is one of the teachers in our school, very conscientious teacher, and is using our siddur and is asking why is there the asterisk on top of the vase, the second vase of the word levavachem, which means you pronounce it not levavchem, but levavachem. So I was a little bit stuck. I said I'd look into it. And I went to my dicta consultant who gave me some insight. Now, perhaps I've shared this before. There are Diktuk Bichlal, is said from the Alter Rebbe, is not a perfect chokhmah. So I've heard something, I don't remember that words, but something to that effect. And I'd like to say the thing like this, that there are different policies, different opinions in Diktuk. Another point which I'd like to say is that there is a science, that Diktuk is a science. What do I mean by that? What is science? Science is looking at phenomena and analyzing. This is working this way, this is going that way. And as a result, the science will predict, and therefore, in an unknown, predictably, this is going to happen. And in a way, Diktuk is looking at the Tanakh and seeing the way things are spelled, perhaps other sources, later sources, but it's analyzing the way it is spelled out in Tanakh, and then developing rules based upon observation. And those observations, as I say, you've got different opinions. If you read Rashi and Al Torah, his diktuk is different to the diktuk which we're familiar with. Also, the names he has for the Nakudas, but that's a separate topic. The diktuk evolved, and so we have a master medactic called Reb Shlomo Zalman Hanau or Hena, and he is a contemporary lechayer of the Baal Shem Tov. Two generations before the Alter Rebbe, 2 or 3 generations before the Alter Rebbe, he publishes, and the Rabbi Yaakov Emden was a contemporary of his, a little bit younger, lashes out at him. He has a whole sefer called Loach Eresh, where he disagrees with him on many of his points. Be that as it may, the Tilas Hashem Siddur is published, is a copy of a Siddur printed in Vilna, Tofresh Ayin Aleph, which tells me like this. Approximately 150 years after Reb Zalman Hena had been active, his policies are adopted by the printer in Vilna, nothing to do with Lubavitch per se. The printers in Vilna, was it Halmonov Achim Rom or whoever, they printed various Sidurim, Ashkenaz and also perhaps Nusach Sfard also, but they printed also Siddur Sechari Siddur. I have the copy. I have an original of the Tofresh Ayin Aleph. Someone lent it to me. So, and the printers in Vilna, they saw the need to clarify where is going to be a Shvo No or Shvo Nach, which means an audible Shvo or a silent Shvo. And they came up with this idea of putting in asterisks, and they followed the policy of Reb Zalman Hena. And in various Misnagdische sources, you've got a mention from Moshe Sternbuch, soll sein gesund. You have a mention from Reb Shroya Devlitsky, and they point to the Chabad Siddur. The Chabad Siddur has got, they're following the Reb Zalman Hena, which is not the popular opinion from their perspective. And in Shema particularly, they will show that in Shema itself, there's 8 times, 10 times where we're following the less popular shitta of diktuk. So I'm saying, first of all, it's not a Chabad thing. This is Reb Zalman Henner and the printers in Vilna, number one. Number two, the fact that 150 years after Reb Zalman Henner, his policies are being used by a printer means that that's the way people spoke. That's the way people davened in the litter. It wasn't the printer who made it up. He is following what is uh, okay. And now, and therefore what? Therefore what? That when you have different dialects, that's legitimate. You have a Hungarian dialect, and you have a Galiciana dialect, and you have a Russische dialect, and you have a Taimani dialect, and you have a Moroccan and a Baghdadi. That's okay. So, back off a little bit. Yeah. Number one. Now, before addressing this immediate question of Levavachem, compare Chabad Siddur to Art Scroll. So let's say Ukasharto. So in the Art Scroll, it's going to say Ukasharto, Uv Kumecho, Uv Shochbecho, perhaps. And perhaps we've once gone through this before. And that's not the way we pronounce it. We're used to Ukashartom, Uv Kumecho, etc. This is also part of Reb Zalman Henner's policy. He has a policy about Shavo, where he invents an idea that there's a Tnua Kalo. You've got Tnuas Gedolos and Tnuas Ktanos. You've got the major vowels and the minor vowels, and then he has the Shavo as a Tnua Kalo, and he has whole policies built around that. But coming back to our particular concern, why in the Vavachem, why is that Shavo? Is it a Shvono? So he comes up with the following rule, and he says the following. He says it like this: when you have a Shvo followed by one of the 6 letters of Begad Kefas, Begad Kefas, some prefer to pronounce it. When you've got the Shvo followed by one of these 6 letters, which 4 of them we differentiate: base vase, chof kof, pei fei, tov sof. So he says the following: if it's hard, then if it's it's a dgusha, then the shvo before it will be a shvo nach. So look, for example, birkas kohanim. The reish is a shvo nach, birkas kohanim. The kof is dgusha, is stressed, and preceding it is a shvo nach. Mishpot, the pei is a dgusha, and therefore the shin in mishpot is a shvo nach. Good. But when that letter, the chof, is a chof, not a kof, then it should be mishachu and ozavom and molachoi and etc. So this is Reb Zalman Henner has developed this rule that when you have the shavo followed by one of those 4 or 6 letters, which have the option of being soft or hard, and the letter is soft, then the shvo before it has to be a shvo no, and therefore it's levavachem, because the chof of levavachem is soft, is refuyo, and therefore the shvo before it is a shvo no. That is the rule which he's bringing out, and thank you, Rabbi Mendy Karasik, for bringing me this source in the Sefer Tzoya HaTeva. This is the work of Reb Zalman Henner, who I mentioned before. We'll move on. So there's a weekly sheet called Farbrengen, and all interesting things there, Werte, story, anecdotes, and they published this past week, about ping pong, and a letter of the Rebbe. Now this letter, you can read here, you can see on the screen, you can see the Rebbe's Ksav Yad Kodesh, ping pong b'Shabbos Kodesh, moving shein lo zemokim klal uchlal. That ping pong on Shabbat, on the holy day of Shabbos, is self-understood, that it has no place for it at all. Story being, in 1960 approximately, you have Reb Aaron Mordechai Zilberstrom, who is a mechanech, and he sees young lads who are Shabbos afternoon, have got lots of spare time, and they are sometimes getting into Chil Shabbos, Rahman al-Islam. So he wants to do something about it. And so he decides to make some kind of club on Shabbos afternoon to keep these kids occupied and included in part of the activities for this Shabbos afternoon club. He includes ping pong, and he writes about this to the Rebbe, and that's the Rebbe's response. So very, very interesting. Such a strong rejection of the idea. So people asking us, um, I got actually someone in the shul asked me by us, and then I got also an email that someone in Muncie had written to the editors of the Farbrengen and asked them for the explanation, and they said they don't have an explanation; they just reprinted from their source. So he writes to me and wants an explanation. So let's try. So we have here the end of Hilchos Muksa, where the Alter Rebbe brings that you're not allowed to play with a ball on Shabbos or Yom Tov because it's not called a tool. It's not a keli, it's not a utensil. V'yesh matirim, and there are those who do permit to play with a ball within Rosh Hashanah, and but the minhag is lahokel, to be lenient, and v'yesh lahem al mishi yismeichu. So we have here, actually look in there's a machlokas Ashkenaz and Sfard. The first one is there. Yosef Karo says that a ball is muksa, you can't play ball on Shabbos, and the Ramah is the lenient one who says it's okay. So therefore, if a football is mutter, so a ping pong ball it patterns much better as far as muksa is concerned. So therefore, you're back to the question: why the Rebbe is so so strong about that ping pong ein lo zevokim klal uchlal on Shabbos. So now we then look in a little bit more. We look in the Beis Yosef in Hilchos Muksa. Before going further, there's one contemporary posuk. They're called the Be'er Moshe, or the Debretziner, and he was asked whether it's okay for girls to play ping pong on Shabbos. And he's got three pages, and he comes to the conclusion, no, even though by girls, not a question of Bittul Torah, and still he's outspoken against it. So now we've got the Bis Yosef. Bis Yosef brings from its earliest source, Shibola Alechet, you're not allowed to play with a ball on Shabbos. However, the Tosfos in Be'er says that it is common, people do play ball on Shabbos. Mishos and Yom Tov. Then we go further. The end of this quote of the Bis Yosef, he quotes from a Gemara Yerushalmi. There was a place called Tur Shimon, a place in Eretz Yisrael. Why was it destroyed? Something because of Znus. V'yesh oimrim shehoyu mesachakim bekador, because they would play ball on Shabbos. So there are strong words, although they're minig Ashkenaz is to allow, but still there's strong words against playing ball on Shabbos, and possibly this is what the Rebbe is seeing here. You've got boys. Would it be? Let's change the question. Instead of playing ping pong, to make a Shabbos afternoon, we're going to do football in the park. Jewish boys make teams, 11 aside, play football in the park. Would that be appropriate for a mechanech to do on a Shabbos with the kids? With these kids are challenge kids. Would that be appropriate? And if you could see that as not being a Shabbos activity, the Rebbe is taking it one step further, also playing ping pong. It's what the Debretziner is saying. It is noisy. It is something which you can hear even from a few houses away. So it's not a quiet entertainment, and it's a distraction from the toichen which Shabbos should have. That's what I can see so far. And so the Rebbe is saying, I don't know what the Rebbe is saying is the Isur he's saying you as a mechanech, and you want to entertain these boys on Shabbos afternoon, but ping pong is not the way to entertain them. Look for something perhaps more meaningful and more engaging. rather than that. That's the best I can tell you. Let's move on to the next question. Someone's asking, is it okay for him to exercise? He needs to exercise for health reasons. His health, it would just be running on a treadmill. No, he has to run. Don't ask me the protim of why this type and that type, but this is what he has. Can he go running early morning before davening? Because later in the day, his job, etc., his schedule, it's not going to happen during the day, and it's important for his health to have this. Is he able to do running before davening early in the day? So before davening, we shouldn't do work before davening. We shouldn't be dealing with personal indulgence before davening. So here I found a sefer called Urag for I looked online. I saw online on my Oitzer, and this brought me to this sefer where he brings various contemporary poskim where asked this question, and they say it's called Sorche Shamayim. Looking after your health would be called Sorche Shamayim. If you can't do it after davening, then that should be okay. Um, it's not like dealing with business, or doing your banking before davening, which shouldn't be done. It's talking here. Um, it's here he has. It doesn't the Shlomo Feinstein doesn't see it as a malacha, doesn't see it as work. It's yeah. I mean, the same question could be: can a person have a shower before davening? And I can tell you that many people do. Yeah, many fine Jews do. It's not seen as a total distraction of. It's getting ready for the day. So this is part of this person's getting ready for the day. So the poil they do allow it if it won't happen otherwise. The answer is yes, obviously because of the need. Right, let's move on. So one of our regular listeners planted a tree about 4 years ago, and now is asking about using the fruit. So we know the first 3 years of a fruit tree are orlo, and they are forbidden to have benefit from. But now is the fourth year. Is there an issue of using the fruit on the fourth year? So the fourth year is called Netar Ravai, and if it's a vineyard, it's called Kerem Ravai, the fourth year of the vineyard. So here we have in Shulchan Aruch that the Mechaber writes that Netar Avoi, the Kedusha. So the Orlo first 3 years is condemned. You can't have any benefit from it. It's also Bahanoah. The fourth year, you would be taking the fruit to Yerushalayim, similar to Masasheni, and similar to Masasheni, you can exchange it for money, and the Kedusha goes on the money. So, as we know. So, does that apply in Chutz La'aretz? Does the fourth year have a fruit have a kedusha? So Mechaber says yes. Yesh Mishoim, the Ramos says the others disagree, and this is only applies in Eretz Yisrael, not in Chutz La'aretz. And then some differentiate between vineyard and other and between grapes and other things. So we have here two opinions. Does Netar Avoi apply in Chutz La'aretz or not? And then we look in the Shach, who writes on the margin, Hilkochnir. Therefore, the advice given is whether it is the fourth year of a vineyard, whether the fourth year of other fruit trees, you should be poider. You should exchange it for a penny, for a pruta. Not a penny. A penny is less than a pruta. 5 pence, 6 pence. Exchange it for money, and then the kedusha will go on that. And like you do with Ma'aser Sheni, and don't do it with a brocha because of the second opinion that it doesn't apply. But you should be poida the fruit of that fourth year, and then you can enjoy it. We can then go on to our next question, and that was someone, our regular listener, is asking. He puts aside, he earns money, and Baruch Hashem, and he puts aside a tenth of his earning into a separate account or envelope. And sometimes people borrow money. He's Baruch Hashem, a person who people can turn to for a loan. So can he use that Meiser money for lending? So normally he uses the money for actually helping poor people, etc. Can he use it from the same fund? Could he use it for lending money? So here you have a contemporary sefer, Stockholm Mishpat, where yesh oimrim, if you put aside your meiser money, you could put it to a fund for lending, even though lending can also be for ashirim. Let's say a person's making a chasana. He's not poor, but at this point he's got a larger expense. He doesn't have the cash. He's got, let's say, he's got properties, but he doesn't have cash. So at the moment he wants to borrow money to be able to deal with it. And he'll pay you back. So he's not a poor person, but there's still a mitzvah of lending money to such a person. So there are those who say that you are fulfilling the mitzvah. You can use your ma'aser money for lending money. Now, and then you can, if that's the case, if you have put it aside for gemach, for lending money, you could also borrow from it if you need it for a short term. But taking your ma'aser money and lending it, and once it's paid back, goes back into your pocket, that's not okay. We're talking about, yes, identifying, using your ma'aser money, some of it, as a lending fund, that's fine. Right. So I think that answers the question. At least I told the person, at least henceforth, you can have in mind that the ma'aser money which you put aside can be some of it can be used for lending. Right. Now we go on to the next question. Someone turns to me and asks me the following. He actually suggested it should be on the panorama. It happens to be that in his particular part of the world, the shul is the central room of the building. It's a converted house, and happens to be that the mikvah is on the other end of that large room. So you've got a central room which is taking up the full width of the house, and towards the back of the house is a mikvah. So then if you want to go to the mikvah, you need to go through the shul. And obviously, when you go out, there's no side entrance. So are you allowed to walk through a shul and to do so? So again, every child learned Mishnah's Baruchas, Lo Yasenu Kapandario. One shouldn't be making the Harabayis as a shortcut to go from A to B to make a shortcut. And similarly, we're not meant to use a shul as a shortcut. So here's the question. What happens if it's not a shortcut? That's the only route. Is that still a problem? Now, I feel uncomfortable with this chumrah because the term kapandario means instead of going around the houses, Rashi's whatever the lotion is, instead of going around the houses, I'll cut through here. Here it's not to cut short. There's no other way. And yet he's quoting from the Tzitz Eliezer, which I admit I did not read up inside. He says, even if there's no other route, one shouldn't be walking through a shul to get elsewhere. And therefore, those who put up an office or storage, and the only way to get there is through the shul, that's not really an appropriate design. If the other room is also for a mitzvah, then it's okay to go through for a purpose of a mitzvah. So it's not so poshut. It looks like it is a problem, and one solution is to stop in the shul and say a posuk or something. What I didn't find, I was looking and I didn't find any comment on this. Does it make a difference whether the shul is a purpose shul, totally dedicated as a shul? Because in many situations, especially in Chabad's houses, etc., it's a multi-purpose room, and it's used also for club activities. It's used for various. To say that has a kedusha. So if it's in shul session, even then, but the space is not a dedicated space for a shul. Therefore, I find it difficult to accept. If you're allowed to do other activities, so how much more so that you should be able to walk through? I didn't find anyone who addresses that particular variation. Let's move on. So I got the same question from two separate people, both actually from France, but different families, that they're going on holiday and there's a complex where there are various dwellings, and one family is in one house and one apartment, and they're renting another apartment within that complex. And but they are one family unit. So then they're going to be eating together. Do they need to make an Erev? And if they do need to make an Erev, the next thing is you need to do Schiras Rishus. Just to explain, I'm discussing this because it's like the principles are fairly common. With a one Yid with a Goy does not need an Erev. One Yid with several Goyim doesn't need an Erev. So if you are in an apartment building and you're the only Jewish family and multiple Goyim, you are allowed to carry in the building. You don't need an Erev. If the gardens, the yard has got a kosher mechitza, 10 tefachim high, not too large gaps, you can carry in the yard also. You don't need an Erev. If you're the only Yid, you don't need to have an Erev where there are other Goyim, where there are Goyim. Where does it become an issue? If there's two Yidden. If there's two Yidden, then you need to make an Erev. You're making an Erev. Then what about the Goyim? You're going to have to do what's called Schiras Rishus. And there's a whole history behind this in the Gemara that they were concerned that an Eid on his own wouldn't live amongst Nochrim because of the Sakona element. But when there's two Yidden, they'll feel that it's safe, and they'll feel comfortable, and then the children will be playing with the children of the neighbors, and as a result, they're going to be drawn to the culture of their neighbors. So, in order to discourage Eden living comfortably with Umm neighbors, they said, you want to make an Erev, you're going to have to do Schiras Rishus. Predictably, the neighbors were going to make a fuss. No, say that's what they wanted. They wanted to discourage this Indian. Well, okay, but that's the need for Schiras Rishus. So now again, so what's the story? We've got, let's say there's 10 dwellings, and 2 of them are populated by Yidden. If that's the case, you need to make an Erev, and then you'd have to have Schiras Rishus, which would mean to rent the shared areas, the corridors, etc. You'd have to rent it from the Goyim. And there's ways of doing it without not being too painful, can be done. Is that necessary over here? So, as I say, here they're not 2 mamish separate units. It's one family unit using 2 apartments, and they're eating together. And that makes them as a single unit. Therefore, there's no need for an Erev. And so you've got this in 2 places in Shulchan Aruch. One is in Siman Shin Samach Vov. That's the top of the screen, where you've got on a given week, Bnei HaChotzer, that they are sitting all together to eat together. So they need to have an Erev, but they're eating all together. So the fact that they all are eating together, that is their Erev. Even though it's only one host who's providing the food, but because they're all eating together, that's the Erev. That's even if they're separate units, because they're eating together. And then we have here Anshe HaChotzer, similar thing, but even if they're eating together with Shabbos, even though each one is eating their own food, but if they're eating as one in one room, that also will make them into a single unit. So for either way, the fact that these 2 families, as I say, they're part of the extended family and they're going to be eating Shabbos meals together, that is itself making them not just an Erev. It's more, making them into a single unit. Because they're a single unit, they don't need to make an Erev in the complex, and therefore they don't have to go to 3 Schiras Rishus either. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so last week we had a discussion about a chosen giving a gift to a kala, and I quoted, as you can see on the screen, from the Nite Gavriel of him giving it through his mother and through his sister. So shortly after the shiur, on Friday morning, I got someone from California, Rov in California. Someone had shared with him that I'd said something about the chosen not giving gifts to the kala, So he shared with me the following. So here is someone is writing to the Rebbe about getting engaged, and here this is how the Rebbe would typically answer. He would write on the margins, circle parts of the note, and write on the margins. And so this is a answer of the Rebbe to someone who's getting engaged, and for Semes dai timei oz, so writes the Rebbe. It's well known, my opinion already from time bygone, that a tabas, a ring, is only given by the chuppah. V'kama matonis acheres yeshnon. There are other forms of gifts you can give. So he's saying to me, which I'm happy to hear, that you see the Rebbe is saying, don't give a ring. They're getting engaged, don't give a ring. Want to give her something else? You can give her something else. And it doesn't go into doing it through your sister, your brother, or your mother, etc. Again, I don't know the circumstances. Perhaps what they were, it could be someone who didn't have relatives, close relatives who could do it on their behalf. I don't know. But there is, at least they have here, some background that the Rebbe was okay with it, of giving matanas. And then he said, if he can say, I can say his name, Reb Geshem Mendel Garelik, when he was meeting his Kala before they were engaged, and Reb Geshem Mendel kind of, it came across that he's like how do you like more like a malach, like not so down to earth, and it was a bit of an issue. And the Rebbe told him that he should give a gift, whether it's through Rabbi Chadakov, but the Rebbe advised him the next meeting he should bring a gift to the Kala, to the prospective Kala. And Baruch Hashem, they got married and they lived happily ever after. And Baruch Hashem set up a nice, beautiful Chassidish family. Right. One last hashlama. And we had this whole discussion about taking off the cream off the cake. Is that a problem of boirer? And so a couple of people asked, well, one Talmud said, if the person doesn't like the cream on the cake for health reasons, why is he eating cream cake? So I told him it's his granddaughter's birthday. But then a couple of people said, you're not allowed to take the bad away from the good. You're allowed to take the good from the bad. So if you put the cream cake flat on the side on your plate, and you take cake away from the cream, problem solved. You're allowed to take the good away from the bad. That's not a problem. So, right, that's as much as I have to share with you this evening. And next Thursday, as I mentioned at the beginning of this year, we're not going to have a shir next Thursday evening because can't use this technology then. And so the next shir will be 2 Thursdays ahead, Mitzvah Hashem. And meanwhile, I want to wish you a good Shabbos and Kabbalas HaTorah B'Simcha B'Primius, and we should be Zoicha to Geula Shleimo Mashiach Tzidkenu B'Mheira V'Yameinu Mamish. Kol Tov.
Shkoyach.
Oh.